The breakout sessions. If we could make our way back to your tables, we can get started. All right. So we have a really fantastic panel for you here up next. I'm sure many of you still have some questions about what exactly it means to be a climate reality leader and what you can do as one. And so now we have a panel of just 4 of our many amazing mentors who are going to come up here and they're going to talk to us a little bit about their experience as a climate reality leader. And hopefully through their discussion, they will be able to answer some of your questions about what you can expect. So without further ado, let's welcome our leaders to the stage. Up first, trained in Nashville in 2007, we have Victoria Cerda. Welcome, Victoria.
Hi. Thanks, Theo.
Please join me in welcoming trained in Manila in 2016, Dean Barone.
Stand up.
Oh.
And trained in Seattle in 2017. Up next, we have Donna Hope. I think I found your tables, Donna.
Wow.
And trained in Colorado in 2017, please welcome Divya Nuwale. And last but not least, please welcome back to the stage former Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. Well, please have a seat. It was a little bit like a graduation ceremony. I heard separate groups cheering for each one of you.
Yes.
Thank you for being mentors, by the way. And I'm anxious to talk with you. How do we want to start? I think maybe one of the best ways to start is just to ask each of you to tell us what your story is. So why don't you begin, Divya?
Yeah.
What's your story? How did you get involved in this, and who are you, and why are you here? And
Okay. I actually want to start off with saying that I was in my undergrad when I watched An Inconvenient Truth, and that's really the start of my story, because I was really young, I didn't know what was happening in the world, and that was the first exposure to climate change and what's happening around the world. And it made me question myself, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And especially when I was back home in India and thinking, do people know about this? Do they know this is what is causing everything? Whenever it rains in Mumbai, everybody thinks, oh, it's the government that has not fixed our roads and potholes, and that's the reason why it's flooding. They don't realize that each year the flooding increases just because of the fact that, climate change is occurring. So that movie really actually started my story, and I would owe that to you, definitely. That's the start of my story.
well, you're nice to say that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And you've enjoyed your experience as a climate leader.
Absolutely. I've met so many inspiring people over the years who have had the opportunity to work with you as well, and I've had the opportunity to train and then now be a mentor. It's been amazing, and every day I meet inspiring people who make me want to do more as well.
And you live in Pittsburgh now?
Yes, I live in Pittsburgh. I came
Okay.
here for grad school 2 years ago, and this is home now.
Oh, well, great. All right. Very good. Donna Hope from Brooklyn.
Yes.
Trained in Seattle.
Yes, New York, represent.
So tell us your story.
Well, I was just really fortunate to have very supportive parents. I used to watch nature shows with my father for fun. I used to go camping with my mother and the rest of my family. And they were really inspirational. In fact, both my parents were labor union organizers, and at a young age, my mother took me to go see the first black woman to earn a PhD in chemical engineering in this country and to start an environmental consulting firm. And I was so inspired, right, please. I was so inspired at that tender age of 11, I decided right then and there that I wanted to be an environmental engineer, even though I had no idea what that meant. I just knew I wanted to be like her.
So she was a role model for you.
She sure was.
Yeah.
And I just realized how important it is to have reflections of yourself to see what you can achieve. And that helped me in my commitment to helping with outreach about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the environmental fields in particular, which is my passion.
Yeah, and share with, great, and share with the group what we were talking about backstage about this training.
Well, I just was recently trained just at the last training in Seattle in the Bellevue area. And I was saying that I just really love the energy here at this training. Not that I didn't get a lot from that training in Seattle, but here there's just something that's a little more cohesive. I feel like people are connecting. I know this is my first time mentoring, so maybe this is true for all experiences as a mentor, but I feel like the mentors have really connected. We certainly made time to get to know each other before this panel. And in particular, that climate justice panel on the first day was so inspirational.
Yeah.
I had so many people come up to me and speak about it. Another mentor, Jill McIntyre-Witt, and I, we co-hosted a dinner and discussion about climate justice afterwards. It was a packed house in the local restaurant, and people were just really thankful. This is what we want to talk about. We want to have these more inclusive conversations.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Donna. Dean Barone from Houston, Texas, and Manila are you from
That's
both
correct.
places?
From both places.
Okay, so, naturally, Divya's from Pittsburgh, Dean's
Right.
from
Exactly.
Manila.
So my story.
What a world we live in.
It's
Tell us your story.
Connected world. Green building consultant, lead professional, and all my clients in Houston, Texas were oil and gas companies. And I was trying to get them to go green, and I tried. And I called what was term what's called stealth green. I tried to sneak it in. They didn't want it.
Yeah.
So I discovered in my travels with the oil and gas companies a project in the Philippines. And the Filipinos really wanted help. And I said, maybe it's time to close up shop and go to a place where I can really help. So I've set up a business there, and I have Filipino lead consultants working with us. With 25 buildings complete, 50 on the way. So when you go to a country that really wants help, that's a time. So mabuhay to my friends out there.
How many square feet are you responsible for now?
We're about 3 million complete. We've got about 5 million on the way.
Wow. Now, just for purposes of comparison, this giant center, and we're only in a tiny part of it, this is 1.5 million square feet, so you've got about 5 times that.
Right, and don't let
And all
anybody-
green.
And platinum as well. We've got 5 platinum projects in.
Wow, that's fantastic.
You can do it anywhere.
That's not easy to do.
No, but you can do it.
Well, that's great. So, Victoria, you're from Ontario, Canada, right?
Yes.
And you were in one of the very,
I've got international and Canadian peeps here.
and you were in one of the very first trainings in Tennessee back in 2007.
I was privileged to be one of the first 20 Canadians that were at the training.
And I remember your daughter at that time was only 11 years old, so she's 21 now. Mm-hmm. And you and she do a lot of presentations together?
Yes, we've done a lot over the years. And we started out before she got the training in 2008, but when I got it in 2007, she so badly wanted to do the presentation that she learned how to do public speaking. She learned how to develop slideshows and do all the graphic design. And then now it's funny because now she's a communications professional, and she's working on for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on their nuclear waste file.
Well, that's great. And that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And what a wonderful, fun experience for you and your daughter to be able to do that together. That must be fun.
It's very fun. It was exciting to see. I have one team from Israel that are a father and daughter. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Shout out. Like, it's nice to see there's a lot of parents and child relationships here, and I'm hoping that we had inspired some of that after so many years of us doing this work together, because she's mentored here 5 times herself at the various trainings over the years too.
Well, thank you so much for all of the mentoring that the 4 of you have done. So, Victoria, what have you learned in all of the presentations you've done and your interactions with climate leaders? What are some of the most important things you've learned?
the most important thing is that I need to connect as a human being with people. So I have a lot of anxiety issues, and I've had to work very hard to be able to deal with that. But this issue has always been so important to my heart. Like when I was a kid, I would go tobogganing a lot. Like in Canada, there's a reasonable amount of snow all winter, and I have a brown tooth to prove it. Contact with a tree. And the winters changed over time. Our snow forts wouldn't stay all winter anymore. Like we used to have them for 2 to 3 months. You'd build one at the start, and you'd be able to play in there all winter long, even at night. And it all changed. And so when I was a teenager, I became really active, and I decided to leave and go up and live on the top of a mountain in Oregon because I just couldn't handle the world anymore. I know some people may have reached that point in their life where it's like, I don't like where things are going. And I realized, though, when I was up there that I was a great role model, but nobody knew what I was doing. Came back down off the mountain, moved back to Canada, and started getting active in my community. And then my good friend Jim Harris emails me and goes, "Hey, I think you'd like to apply for this training with Al Gore." And it was right after you had done the release of An Inconvenient Truth. And I got to be honest, for 3 days, I was seriously depressed. Now, I bet people can understand that feeling too, right? Where you get hit with that, just like it's so strong in your heart that how can this be this way? But I realized after that 3 days that what's the point of me doing this? I'm not helping any. And all this stuff is happening now. We need to do stuff now. So it was after that, somehow, this little rural Canadian that had 6,000 people in her hometown got accepted to get the Honorable Al Gore to get some training. And 8 trainings later, I'm here and still going, still presenting.
Well, that's fantastic. That's great. So I have a number of questions that I'd like all 4 of you to address, and we'll go down the line here. First question is, what is the most valuable feedback that you have gotten from one of your audiences that has caused you to make changes in your presentation? Divya?
I think as I speak to more and more people and make presentations, most of them feel very interested, but also helpless. They don't know what would be the right action or the next step that they should be taking.
They want to know what to do.
They want to know what to do, and it's always like trying to help them figure out what they can do. Mm-hmm. And I think coming to the Climate Reality Conference is one of the, best ways to actually learn how to, lead on climate, take on against the fight against the climate change. And I think what I'm always trying to do is helping people to take that next step, and based on making that human connection, and then trying to understand what is their focus area, and then taking it forward.
Great. Mm-hmm. Donna, do you remember a particular feedback that you got from one of your audiences that caused you to adjust?
Absolutely, and full disclosure, since I was just trained, I haven't yet given a climate reality presentation, Mr. Gore. Just full disclosure. However, I do give a lot of climate awareness presentations and environmental presentations.
Right.
And because I'm working in environmental justice and climate justice spaces, I always try to make sure that I'm presenting to as diverse an audience as possible. And a lot of the feedback I get is thanks. A lot of times we are used to seeing these overwhelming images of the disproportionate negative impacts that happen in communities of color, both domestically and in the global south and the island nations. But we don't then see the empowering light of how the strategies are implemented and the knowledge base is implemented from these same communities, from our indigenous communities, from our communities of color. And so I always try to intersperse those messages of inspiration and hope, particularly in these communities that are just disadvantaged, the vulnerable, the marginalized. They don't have the access to this power to enact change. So to show that this is possible has been really inspirational. This is a great feedback that I get.
Well, that's great. And you talked about how you were inspired as a girl by this role model that you were really moved by. I just bet you that there are a lot of people in your audiences who take you as a role model.
Thank you. I hope so. Thank you.
I'll interject a quick personal story of mine. Back in the 1960s, I was inspired by one of my teachers in college, Roger Revelle. I mentioned him the other day, and that's really what launched me on this. And I kept in touch with him and his family. One of his daughters came to one of the trainings, and she's a climate leader now. And I went to honor him on the 100th anniversary of his birth. This was a few years ago in California, and his widow was still alive. At that time, she was 99, and his whole family was there. And in preparing for that speech, I read a lot more about his lifetime, and I was so moved when I read that when he had been a college student early in the 20th century, he had had a college teacher who inspired him to get into the environmental field. And I thought to myself, wow, how many of these chains of inspiration go way back, and you could probably trace them all the way back. Dean, what kind of, can you remember a particular example of of feedback that you've gotten from one of your audiences that caused you to change?
I do, and it was kind of an evolution. I used to have a package of presenting green buildings and the benefits of green buildings and the efficiencies. And the audience said, okay, that's good. And I didn't understand until later when people were asking questions, well, how do green buildings affect climate? I thought, that's the missing part. But with your presentation folded into my building, it all made sense. And now when I do presentations, there's a complete connection between the benefits of green buildings and how it has on the environment. So I didn't realize, and I was so focused on the building message, and I knew there was an outcome. I assumed my audience understood the benefit, but until you kind of paint it very clear for them.
Yeah, I've had that experience myself many times where I go over, I work on the main slideshow every single day, practically, not every day, but almost every day. And certainly before and after each presentation. And sometimes you connect the dots and there's a space between one dot and another dot, and somebody gets, whoa, how did that connect? Victoria, any particular feedback that you remember as especially valuable?
The most interesting and memorable experience I had once wasn't really feedback, but it was that I was giving a presentation to a class of kids that were about 11 and 12, and it was the same time my daughter was that age, and we were co-presenting. And I did the science part and talked about what was happening around the world. And in rural Canada, there's usually not a lot of diversity in the audience. But there was one girl that was, darker skinned in the audience, and we were going through the presentation, and she put up her hand at one point, and it was the slide with Mumbai, with 7 feet of water and with all the garbage, and that, you may remember that slide in the original show. And she said, I was there.
Really? Wow.
And I learned to be very, very sensitive to what I was saying in the presentations, because you never know who's had what experience that will trigger them. Like, it could trigger them into a form of PTSD, or it could trigger like just a lot of emotion and memories, and how to handle that in the middle of a presentation was a powerful thing. So luckily I have some experience with dealing with people that have had experienced trauma. So I asked her if she would be willing to talk about it with the class. So she got to share with the class her experience of being locked in the 3rd apartment with her grandmother and her brother, and her grandmother was not mobile, so they weren't able to leave when all the million other people evacuated, and people were looting the city, and they were afraid for their lives. They had no food and no water. And then since she shared this, her class got a different experience of her with being an immigrant to our country and the types of things that she was dealing with. And later on, the teacher told me that after we left, they had a big class discussion, and they understood social justice and how climate change was happening around the world. And so that kind of feedback of being sensitive but also kind of being adaptable when you're giving a presentation, so that you're able to handle a variety of things that can happen in it.
Yeah, well, that's great. Now, whoever wants to answer this, Have any of you, did any of you ever experience being scared before a presentation?
No.
I have. I gave a presentation in front of my grade 10 science teacher. Wouldn't anyone find that scary? And he was the guy that would walk around with a ruler and hit your desk if you were like half asleep or something. It was
Talk about
horrible.
PTSD.
It was the worst experience of my life. But he came up to me. He came up to me afterwards, and I was like, "What kind of grade would you give me?" It's like an A. That was awesome. I am so proud of you. It was wonderful.
Anybody else have, especially when you first began to speak about climate, make presentations, give talks, have you had to overcome fear and anxiety?
I have a story, not necessarily anxiety or anything being fear, but actually overwhelmed, just because I was doing workshops talking about climate change in these tiny government schools in India, and I was so overwhelmed when the kids knew everything that I was saying, and they're from Muslim minority school, government school in India, which probably does not get any clean water or doesn't have enough toilets, but they know everything. They know that riding the bicycle to school is more beneficial than just like taking the motorbike or something. They actually know, and I was overwhelmed that they already know this. And then, for me, the anxiety came from, so what can I add more? They already know, they live a sustainable life. What can I do to actually take it to the next level? And then then I kind of had a workshop and conversation with them on, so what do you think the cities should do? And what do you think people who are not doing this should do? And then I had to turn the conversation to that. And I learned so much from them in everything that they did back in their homes. They don't have refrigerators. So, it was a good experience to learn how they, store their food and water and how they purify the water. So it was an amazing experience. You never know where you can learn and who you can learn from. So I think it's important to be open when you're giving a presentation to actually learn from the audience and take it.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I learned so much from the audiences that I meet with and try to incorporate it. And by the way, I've also had the experience of having people come up to me or speak up during the slideshow or come up afterwards and tell me about a particular slide that they were a part of, an experience that they were a part of. Donna, Dean, have either of you ever had to overcome fear or anxiety for a presentation?
Look at, we're both so cool and calm. I mean, I don't know.
Not really, because I understood what I was talking, so I was very comfortable. But I have worked with a lot of my mentees in the past and coached them and helped them. And one thing that they always they've never really spoken public before. So I always tell them, start off small, work with your family. We were joking about Thanksgiving's coming. What a great time to sit down and practice.
We've had a lot of talk about Thanksgiving.
Sure. And then grow it from there and pick a friendly audience, maybe your kid's school. And kids are wonderful to talk to about this.
Yeah.
There are tons of questions, good questions too. So start off easy. Don't jump into a town hall quite at first.
Did any of you practice with family members, practice with friends?
Friends, colleagues.
Yeah,
Colleagues,
yeah. So to all of you, and we'll start with you, Victoria. You've all been mentors and you've been a part of this. Thank you. And you've already individually talked with quite a few people, but if you could give one word of advice, everybody's here has gotten a lot of advice these last 3 days, but if you could give one particularly valuable bit of advice to this group, what would it be?
I would make sure that you plan a reward for yourself after. It's one of the best things I've ever done. I've always, even if it's a little reward, like I planned that I'm going to buy myself a new fantasy book So it's something off topic, and I go and get a soy latte, and I sit at the coffee shop, and I give myself 2 to 3 hours where I feel that I'm proud of myself, and that I can take the time to not think about the climate crisis for a few hours before I get back to work.
That's a great suggestion. That's in all these 36 trainings, that's the first time that bit of advice has been offered. I think that's wonderful, I'm going to take that advice. I think I need that. Thank you.
I'm doing it tomorrow, tomorrow afternoon.
Well, all I can say is you're among friends, and you've made new friends today, and you've got a lot of support whether it's through the hub by yourself or just talking to your mentors or colleagues. You've got a lot of people that you can just brainstorm with. You got a lot of new support.
And you've taken advantage of that with the Climate Hub and also direct connections with people who are other climate leaders?
Because I work with so many people around the world, I've had the opportunity in the past to mentor a lot of international groups. Using the hub as a way to communicate is a very good tool. And you can direct people to looking for the research in email and Facebook. But being able to know that everybody that's here today and the others that have been trained before, we're all on the same page. We're all here to help each other.
Yeah, Donna, what kind of advice would you offer?
Yeah, similar to that, I'd say the networking. I'm passionate about networking. If anyone knows me knows, it's in my email signature. It says professional networker. I'm very serious about it. So this is an amazing group to network with. Just in my 2 tables of mentees, I was super excited, as they'll tell you, for them to meet each other. Once we did introductions before coming here, I said, oh my goodness, you are working on this initiative in New York City. You're doing this amazing thing. You're working together, but you might not know each other. So that right there is just a microcosm of this larger community, and then the bigger community of everyone who's been trained is tremendous. And I always advocate for keeping up these networks, keep in touch with people, follow up, and utilize this tremendous resource.
So to add to what Dean and Donna said, I want to actually mention that in my Denver training just 6 months ago, we were like 9 people at my table. 4 of them are still here, again in this room, very room. So 3 of us from the table came back this time as mentors, and our original mentor Keith is here as a mentor as well. So I mean, the friendships that we made have actually helped us, be together, stay together, and come back here together. And I mean, that's the greatest example I can give of what the value of such a training and how it brings us together and keeps us inspired and going.
Well, that's fantastic. Another question. How do you keep yourself motivated? How do you avoid burnout? We already heard this reward suggestion, but how do you avoid burnout, keep yourself motivated? Anybody?
I set up small wins for myself on a regular basis.
Small wins?
Small wins. So little things I know that are going to be good that happen, that I feel that things are moving along. I like working on a number of different projects at the same time so that I know that there's always something that's going to be able to move forward. Because like I was a municipal councillor, and quite often in politics, you can't always move things as fast as you'd like. So I'd set up a number.
I can confirm that.
Yes. Yeah. I think most of us feel that, right? And so it's nice to be able to just have a number of different things, and then every week you can, like in football, you're just moving it forward a few yards, and that makes you feel good that you know that there's some progress happening and that things are moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm motivated because as an architect designer, when we would be working on a project, we had to deliver something. It's designed by committee. You could never really get to the ultimate design. But now as a green consultant who's not physically designing buildings, but coaching and helping the team to go green, I'm motivated by the fact that I'm really making a difference. And when the owner says to me, we want gold, then I have a lot of power to really work with that team to implement ideas and suggestions that really will help both the environment, and I know I'm delivering a product that will not harm. Mm-hmm. So it's good motivation.
Donna?
Well, I'm really lucky that hope is in my name, so I always have it. as a freelance consultant, I'm able to pick and choose more or less the projects that I work with and with whom I work. And I've been very fortunate to work with very motivated, passionate people who work in the environmental space, particularly on environmental justice and climate justice advocacy. And that is such a motivator because, if anything, when we have access to the information, it does seem very dire. And it does seem like there's not enough inclusion. It does seem like there's not enough being done. But these people are really the movers and shakers who are changing that dynamic. And they inspire me. I, in turn, inspire them. And it's this like beautiful cyclical hope, rejuvenation that, that I continue to seek out. So.
Yeah. Divya, you ever feel vulnerable to burnout? How do you get past that if you do, and how do you stay motivated?
I think I do feel a lot of burnout, like reading the news. And I know it sounds cliche, but I'm going to say my answer to stay motivated is actually social media. I think for people my age especially, you know, there's so much that, you know, there's a lot of social media exposure. And I think if used in the right way, and it keeps you inspiring. I have surrounded myself in real life and on social media people who actually inspire me every day. And, you know, they're doing these amazing things. So, you know, I'm reading about what they're doing in their life, and it keeps me going and wants me to support them, help them, and do more myself. So that's how I keep myself going.
That's really interesting. You know, we live in a time when there's kind of a fresh and rising awareness of some of the downsides of social media, and you read a lot of criticism of it. And I actually, you know, I've been a little bit critical myself from time to time of people who just get addicted seemingly and so absorbed with social media. But you're highlighting the other side of it, which I also hear a lot. If you're careful about who you decide to connect with on a regular basis, it can be a tremendous source of strength and new knowledge and understanding. I don't know how to, you know, advise people to strike that balance. I'm not an expert in it, but it definitely has an upside for sure.
Absolutely. We have all these people on a Facebook page, which is the Pittsburgh, you know, Climate Reality Leadership Corps. And, you know, we have people constantly sharing pictures and, you know, showing sustainability in action on Twitter. So, you know, it's very inspiring, the different side of it completely. So.
Now, all of you are climate leaders, of course, and that's the principal reason you're on this panel, but all of you are also mentors. And so on behalf of all of these new climate leaders, I want to ask each of you, how would you like to be used as a mentor? What advice would you have for climate leaders who are thinking about asking questions of their mentor, seeking advice? So do you have any tips based on how you like to be used as a mentor?
I am here for that. So I want people to get me to network and connect. One of the nice things if I'm someone's mentor is that I've had such a long history in the organization that I can go, well, this person was trained back in 2008 that has a specialty in energy efficiency for the Royal Mint, and I can introduce Dean to Peter Corbin. And, you know, I can make those kind of connections that with all this institutional knowledge that I have, that I'm quite happy to share, because even for some of the staff, I was here before the staff, and I can help carry some things forward that with that, how it works. But I also just like giving support. I'm all about action on the ground and getting things done. I actually have my own consulting firm that's all around, I call it implementing community dreams, because I believe we all need to have some support in being able to do and reach those goals and those good things that we want to see happen. And there are some of us that have a lot more experience doing those things and knowing the ins and outs of politics and with nonprofits and charities and foundations and how they all work. And if we have more people that are willing to offer that expertise out, that's one of the biggest things that I love doing with people. So anybody here, like seriously, feel free to contact me, because I love being able to help make good things happen in the world.
That's great. Dean, how do you, want to be best used as a mentor?
I think of myself as a collaborator, a partner, somebody they can come to as either resource, support. If they want to review their presentation before they take it, we can do it. Because I have people around the world, we can do it through Skype, through email, face-to-face. So connecting with people, finding out what would be beneficial for them, to how to communicate. And then once we are together, I think of it as a collaboration, helping, supporting, because I learned a lot too from my mentees.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street.
Great. Donna and Divya, both of you are kind of new mentors, both of you being trained earlier this year. But do you have any advice on how to, you'd like to be best used?
Yes, and I hope I've been conveying this to my tables, but I was very serious about being a passionate networker and being super excited about them all meeting each other and finding the interconnection and intersectionality of their work. And however I can inspire to expand that, again, I'm a huge advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And any way that I can inspire that, particularly when we go back to our community of New York City, which is extremely diverse, and we say bringing our message back to our communities, how can we elevate these positive messages? How can we be more embracing and inclusive? Any way that I can inspire that, absolutely. I would love to see more mentors who are in the LGBT community. I would love to see more women and young mentors. I would love to see more Indigenous, people of color, people from the Global South communities.
Sure.
Because, like I said, I was inspired by seeing a reflection of myself when I was young, and that's powerful. In any way that I could help inspire that, I will.
I actually have a specific action right after this training ends. I'm helping found the Pittsburgh chapter for Climate Reality.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
And we're looking for everybody who's here at the training from Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania to come together and form the first chapter here in the region. And I will be actually reaching out to also, get some actions going. So anybody who's interested to be a part of the chapter, business leaders, entrepreneurs, activists, everybody, please get in touch with me. You can actually write to me or to chapters at Climate Reality and help start the chapter. So definitely we're going to be meeting and we're going to be doing a lot of stuff in the coming months.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. We've got a lot of people from Pittsburgh here. How many, just a show of hands, how many people are actually from Pittsburgh in this group? So
Yeah.
you're going to get a lot of contacts here.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work to be done in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, another question. I've heard over the years, and I've learned from my own experiences, that one of the most powerful ways to successfully communicate with an audience is to connect with them personally and to make sure that you give them some sense of who you are and why you feel passionately about this. And there's no one formula for doing that, but I'm wondering if you all have any advice on that. Because I'm a firm believer that, the information that we're trying to communicate to people and the suggestions and all that, very, very important. But one of the most important things, and maybe the most important thing, is to find a way for them to get a sense of your passion about this and why you feel as strongly as you do in a way that really connects with them and motivates with them. I'm sure you know what I'm trying to get at, because it's not just a matter of words, but do you have any advice on how to do that?
My good friend, Ningwa Kwe George, is an elder at Saugeen First Nation. She actually attended the training in 2015 in Toronto. She told me that it's really important to get to know the people in the audience that you're going to be speaking to and learn what the culture is that they're from and the way that you should introduce yourself to them, because it's going to be different for different audiences. If I'm talking, and it makes sense in other applications, even by industry, if I spoke to ASHRAE, which is a group of engineers that do heating and cooling. The way that I would talk about my own experience and establish trust and credibility would be more, I was a municipal councilor, I have a bachelor degree.
You'd leave the mountaintop part.
Yes, I wouldn't talk about the mountaintop part. Whereas if I went to an Anishinaabe community, I would say, I'm fourth generation Friends of the Anishinaabe. I'm a white Buffalo woman. I have been working for the band for many years, and I have enjoyed being able to give support and help develop lots of projects with the people with what they want to do. But if I wouldn't say that in my own community, that's not how I would introduce myself. And in my town, I don't even talk about being on council, that I used to be a politician, because I leave that one part off now. and talk about, how I've done a lot of, 10,000 big tree plantings in the last 6 years. Or, like there's different topics I would bring up in order to gain credibility with those people that I'm talking to. And that is being able to localize it so that you have that really strong personal connection with your audience is the
Well,
best
how do
thing.
you get to know who's in your audience? I mean, maybe that's a dumb question, because sometimes if you're going to speak to a group of engineers, you know at least that much. But is there any secret that you all have found to? I'm going to come back and let the other three of you talk about introducing yourself and connecting personally, but just to pursue this for a moment, how do you get to know your audience or enough about your audience to learn more about the best ways to connect?
I establish a really strong connection with the person who asked me to come. And so I ask them a lot of questions about the audience and where they're from, what it's like in the community that they're in. And that can be a community of choice, like an engineering group, or it can be a geographic community or an ethnic or cultural community. But then I have a real conversation, and I normally do that by video conference if it's at a distance, because I live in a rural area, so I don't talk very often in my own town. And then I establish that really strong connection. So do you remember Joanne Duman?
Yep.
So I gave a presentation. It was I was piloting doing the webinars for the Climate Reality Project, and I gave a presentation to Texarkana, Texas, which is actually my husband was born in Texas, so I have some connections there. And I talked to her first, and I helped her to get her Wi-Fi going at her local library, and we tested out how to be able to run Skype, and we sat and chatted for a while, and I had no idea of her background or anything that she did, and at the end of my presentation I was like, hey, you could come to a training, and then she was accepted in the next one and on stage.
You're reminding me that I got some really valuable advice many years ago on how to learn more about an audience. And when you said you establish a really strong connection with the person who invited you, or the first contact you had, that person is likely to know more about the group. I always ask 2 questions, and I may ask these same 2 questions of more than one person who knows about the group. And here are the questions I ask. Number 1, tell me, what are 3 things that this group as a whole, think about the group as a whole, what are 3 things they feel really good about? And often they'll have to really kind of scratch their heads, they'll come up with one right away, and then you have to dig for the other 2 sometimes. And then the second question is, what are 3 things that they feel really bad about, or that they're really concerned about? And having those 6 things actually helps me to understand a little bit more about how to navigate the emotional terrain. Wow. But how do you connect with an audience, Dean?
I really like what you just said.
Go ahead, Don.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You go. Keep going.
No, go ahead.
I really like what you just said, Mr. Gore, because I feel like, particularly in these times, we're very quick to know exactly what those 3 things are that make us feel really bad. And what makes us feel good, 1, we might even feel guilty about feeling good about anything in these times. But I also like to ask when I go into an audience, like, where are you coming from? I would like to know your ethnic background. I like to know what sector you work in, if you are working, if you're in school, what you're studying, what you're interested in, what you would like to gain from this, because I could maybe tailor my entire presentation on the spot based on that. And I would want to make sure, obviously, that I'm connecting with my audience and that they're taking something valuable away.
Yeah, great.
And I agree. And what I also like to do is interject a very personal story. And I have 2 short ones. One, I was in Manila when Yolanda hit Tacloban. And
Yolanda is the Philippine name for Haiyan,
Right.
super typhoon. Yeah.
Now, in Manila, we were okay, a lot of wind and rain, but they really got hit hard, so what could I do? And they were bringing in refugees from Tacloban into Manila, and they needed drivers, people that could bring them to family members in Manila. So I can drive, I know Manila traffic, so drove to the airport, not sure what to expect. And when these small children came out 5 days after the typhoon, covered in mud, shell shock, and having to drive them home, not saying a word, still shaking in the car. That was like, wow. And when I tell that story, it makes a personal connection in the audience, and now they're engaged.
So you're sharing with your audience a personal story that enables them to really connect
Now they
with
wanna
the
hear what I
impact
have
of
to
this
say.
event. Divya?
Very similar to Dean, actually. I start off with something, my personal story, and then gauge the reaction from the audience, and then try to take it from there about what would be the next best thing to talk about, or how I can connect further and really engage them into the conversation. Sometimes it's as personal as saying, you know, I experienced floods when I was like 10 years old. I used to see my city, you know, being flooded with rainwater, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't go to school. I had blackouts for like a week, and I had no electricity or anything to, you know, like do anything. I used to live in candlelight for, you know, like a week. So I try to make that personal connect that, hey, I've done the same thing as you have done, and that's why we are of the same, you know, same group, and so we need to help each other. So, you know, try
That's
to
great.
start with the story, and then, you know.
You
take it
began
from
with
there.
that same story here in this session.
Exactly,
too.
yes, my personal story.
Yeah, and it really made it easier for us to connect with you. We've run out of time, but pushing the boundaries just a little bit. If there's anything that any of you wanted to say to this group that I haven't given you a chance to say, have at it.
I have one. I seem to always be the first one whenever you open it up this way, but sorry to hog. But I work with an Indigenous community a lot, partially because, I mean, I love them to pieces. I think it's a just thing to do with the situation of how most Indigenous people around the world have been treated. But it's also that they have a lot of, seriously, it's a very big issue. But they also have a huge amount of growing power internationally because they can assert Indigenous rights that are enshrined in the United Nations rights for Indigenous people around the treatment of land and water. I've been carrying a water bottle from my the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation this whole time, reminding me that water is life, and that they they asserted their rights so that now for them to have a nuclear waste depository, a deep geological repository near where we live, like we live next to the biggest nuclear plant in the world, Bruce Power. And I, just to be fair, like I have good relations with Bruce Power, they try their best, but it is the biggest nuclear facility, they have nuclear waste. And the Indigenous people have it from both the Ontario Power Generation and from the federal environment minister, that they have to consent to the waste project that they're working on. Now that is huge.
Yeah.
In the, you know, around the world, that is rare, that type of like free, prior and informed consent being brought in and legally being upheld. And there are forerunners on that in the world. And my, you know, my good friends that are there, former Chief Randall Kage is the main person that's working on this, and has been for a long time. They're in these rights of Indigenous people can be huge allies for all of us when we're working on. In particular with them, but like any vulnerable communities, because they're the ones who really know what's happening, and they can bring a lot of passion into this dialogue that we can have.
Yeah, I really want to second that comment. My oldest daughter, Corinna Gore, runs the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary in New York. And she has introduced me to a lot of Indigenous leaders, and I'm among the millions who were inspired by the Standing Rock Sioux when they made their fight. Their great teaching, Water is Life, has been so powerful. And I think maybe especially among the younger generation of Indigenous peoples around the world, certainly in North America, there has been a real rising. And at the Seattle training, we learned a specific example, more than one, of how tribes were leveraging some of those unique treaty rights to actually lead the entire larger community to block a coal shipment point, and that's a great point. Before we close, anybody else have something they have not had a chance to say that they were looking forward to?
Well, just quickly, just on the exact things we're talking about, there's the principles of the Indigenous communities. There's also environmental justice principles that you could look up online that not only will make your meeting space or your outreach or advocacy better, but just you better as a human being. They're just kind of amazing principles that if you incorporate into your everyday will help bring about some better solutions and more inclusive solutions. So that's
Any last words, Dean or Divya?
I'll just say that you're empowered, you got the tools, you have friends. If you watch the news on Friday and you get really depressed, go to your email, go to Facebook, connect up, do something. So that's all I can say.
Divya?
My last words, just really excited to help get the Pittsburgh chapter formed and get some action going and working together with the people here. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking these 4 great climate leaders and mentors. Thank you so much. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful job. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right.
Remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my mother, who is at table 30 and came to attend the training today. So it really does just go to show you that talking to family members, friends, loved ones about this issue and about getting them involved, it works. So one last thing, one last ask that I have for you guys is, no 2 trainings are ever the same. We're constantly looking to build and improve this experience. So what would be really, really helpful for us is if you complete the participant surveys, which are found on the last couple of pages in your participant booklet. If you can fill those out, tear them out of your booklet and give them to your mentor, that would be fantastic. And with that said, we are almost done. So to help us wrap up, please join me in welcoming back to the stage Ken Berlin.
Thanks again. Hello again. I'd like to start off by thanking all of you for being such a great group of trainees. We've really enjoyed working with you and speaking to you, and we're looking forward to working with you going forward. So thank you all. Thank you. I obviously hope you've enjoyed the training. Our goal in the training was to deepen your understanding of the climate crisis. We trained you through the marvelous presentations by Al Gore to give presentations. We tried to give you the tools you need to be a leader in your community on climate change. We presented to you real world problems and the efforts being made to solve those problems. And we presented what we hope you will agree were a bunch of terrific speakers, from Larry Schweiger to Maya Peduto, scientists Dr. Jennifer Francis, Michael Mann and Richard Alley, Veronica Koptis, and many more. So we were very pleased with these speakers. I hope you were also. And of course, our goal was to deepen your commitment to addressing the climate crisis and to working with the Climate Reality team going forward. And again, I hope we've succeeded in that effort. I think we have, but I, again, want to thank you all for doing that. One point that Al Gore made, and we've been talking about through this conference, is how important it is for people to tell their story. So I guess I should really tell my story about why I'm interested in this. I'm interested in climate change because of many different factors. I care deeply about its impact on people and on communities. I care about the economic impact. I care about how the United States is reacting on it. But my interest in it really starts in what really is kind of a weird way, and that is I'm a very serious birder. I've been a birder since I was 10 years old. I've seen over 6,000 species of birds in my life. So I've traveled all over the world looking at species. This year, for example, I was in the islands of Sulawesi and Halmahera in Indonesia for a couple of weeks. And so I see firsthand the impacts of climate change on species and what's happening around the world. Now, you know, it's sort of a golden age for what I do, because you can travel anywhere now in a way you couldn't do historically. And even though many species are becoming rare, we know where all these species are, and we can at least look for them. And we find most of them if we look hard enough. So we can go around the world and tremendously enjoy biodiversity. That won't be true in the future if we don't deal with climate change. As Al Gore pointed out, 50% of the species in the world could become extinct by the end of this century. That's a terrible legacy to leave behind. And none of us want to do that. So that's the reason I've become particularly interested in this. You all have your stories. Some of them are weird, like my story, but feel free to tell your story as you go along. This is my 12th training. Everyone is different and everyone is interesting. And I hope that many of you will come back as mentors. What we're going to do now is, now that you are about to become climate reality leaders, we're going to give you a green ring and a certificate. Wear them proudly, and I'm going to take a few minutes off while they're handed out by your mentors. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, can we get everybody to sit down? I'm going to get started again in a minute if everybody can sit down, and when I'm finished, Al Gore is going to come back out. So if we can get your attention, that would be great. Okay. If people can sit down, we can finish up now. Well, what I would like to do now is thank the people who really put this production on. And so if I could have your attention to do that. First, I'd like to thank Tony, Elena, and the team from Freeman Productions who produced this phenomenal show. Thank you, Tony and Elena. Tony, could you come up? Next, as we said in the very first presentation, we take sustainability very seriously. We, in fact, have succeeded in diverting 95% of the waste from this training. That was all led by a sustainability consultant, Jamie Knack, and I'd like to thank her for the work that she did. I'd also like to thank the David L. Lawrence Convention Center and their staff for accommodating our every request and taking care of our participants. On the Climate Reality staff, I'd like to start off by thanking Elena Alec, our Director of Engagement, for the tremendous work she did in organizing this. Elena. I'd like to thank Adam Allen, our Special Projects Manager. I'd like to thank Laura Deutsch, my Special Assistant, for helping out so much. And I'd like to thank the whole staff of the Climate Reality Project. Please come up front and join me, and please give them a hand. And I'd like to thank all of our partners who helped us put this program together, and we'll put their names up on the screen, I think. Yeah, they are, sorry. And in particular, I'd like to thank the Heinz Endowments and the people from the Heinz Endowments. Thank you. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation today. I hope I'll be speaking to most of you in the future. Thank you very much, and let me turn the stage over to Al Gore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Ken Berlin for doing a fantastic job. I too want to thank the entire Climate Reality team. They really have outdone themselves. Bob and Ken, to you and your leadership team, a special word of thanks. And I want to thank Larry Schweiger, who is on stage. I want to thank our science advisors, Henry Pollack and Michael Mann. Thanks so much. And Dr. Jennifer Francis, who joined us, and the other scientists who joined us. Ken thanked Tony Allen, but I also want to say a word of thanks to Tony and Elena Lauer from Freeman. They always do a wonderful job. And in thanking the Heinz endowments, I want to say a special word of thanks to Teresa Heinz, who was here for much of this event. And she, I love her like a sister, and she is a wonderful environmental leader. I want to thank the head of the Heinz endowments, or the chair, rather, Andre Heinz, who is an outstanding environmental leader in his own right. And I want to particularly thank Grant Oliphant, the president of the Heinz endowments, and John Ellis and Donna Evans Sebastian. And allow me to also thank my team in Nashville on my personal staff, who helped me with slideshows and logistics and everything else. Brad Hall and Jill Martin, Nick Conger, and Raina Davis are here, and Beth Gear, my chief of staff, Alex Lambaugh, Lisa Berg, James Hunsberger. I'm really grateful to them. And there are many others, the people who run this magnificent facility. But most of all, thanks to each and every one of you, to the mentors, and especially to all of you who have taken the time to come here. Now, I'm going to say a few closing words, but before I do, I have the great privilege of presenting the Green Ring Award. We have started in the last few years presenting a Green Ring Award on the occasion of each one of these trainings. And in recognition of her work as an exceptional climate leader who has gone above and beyond the call of duty, and everybody who has worked with her knows this, I'm proud to honor Harriet Sugarman with the Green Ring Award. So Harriet, come on out here. Congratulations to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Harriet. Just stand here for a minute. Harriet was in the second training. It was held in Nashville, Tennessee. The first one was on my farm in Carthage, and we had a large training in 2007, one of the very first trainings. And ever since then, Harriet has been a shining example of determination and creativity in every aspect of her personal life and her work to help solve the climate crisis. Whether through her work as a policy analyst and economist for renowned organizations like the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund, or as the executive director of her nonprofit organization that she founded, Climate Mama, or in her most important job as a mama, Harriet has shown us how activism can be not only an activity, but really a way of life. She founded Climate Mama and launched it in 2009 to educate parents about the climate crisis and provide them with the tools they need to ensure their children can grow up in a safe and healthy world. And as executive director of Climate Mama, she has shown all of us the human face of the climate crisis. We at Climate Reality are particularly grateful for Harriet's dedication to convening Climate Reality leaders as the chair of Climate Reality's New York City Metro chapter, and her leadership as a mentor at so many of the trainings that we have held. And among her many accomplishments, Harriet was invited by the United Nations Foundation to report from inside the UN on the 2014 Head of State Summit on Climate Change. She helped to put out public hearings and forums for New York State on the health impacts of fracking, She directly contributed to the success of New York State's ban on fracking, so congratulations on that. And she also served on the group that wrote New Jersey's conservation roadmap, which is going to be used to guide the incoming governor of New Jersey. And by the way, that election is just about 19 days from now. So Harriet, thank you for your tireless work, for your unmatched compassion for all those affected by the climate crisis. Your dedication and determination on behalf of all of our children and grandchildren exemplifies what it means to be a climate reality leader. And for all of those reasons, it is my great honor to now present you with the Green Ring Award with your name as a part of it. So congratulations to you. I'm very proud of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, these are the final words of this training. Thank you again for being here for 3 days. I've been here since Sunday evening. I've enjoyed so much getting to know some of you personally, getting to know all of you as part of this magnificent group. I think it is absolutely one of the best sessions we've ever had. Actually, maybe the best, because we improve each time. And you all have made this one the best, so thank you much. I've talked to you so frequently and so long that I don't want to belabor this, but I thought I might just very briefly tell you my story. I first began to understand what the environment was all about when I was a little boy following my father on our family farm. And his generation was profoundly affected by the soil erosion crisis that they had experienced in the 1920s and 30s. And he and my mother really used that as a way to teach my sister and me about the duty we all have to care about the land. I remember so vividly, as if it was yesterday, when my father first taught me to recognize when a gully was just beginning to get started, and to immediately take steps to protect the land. And even though individual farmers learned those lessons and brought about a change that led to a resolution for the most part of that crisis, it really took public policy to protect the land. And we still need public policy on that. For every kilogram of food that's produced in the Midwest, about a kilogram of topsoil still goes down the Mississippi River. So we've made progress, but we need to make more. I often say that as important as it is to change the light bulbs, it's more important to change the policies and the laws and the treaties and the agreements and the understandings and the values and the ways that we can work together. But as I say, I remember that as if it was yesterday, and it made a deep impression on me. And the next chapter in the story of how I became awakened to the relationship we ought to have to the environment, I remembered, this has a connection to Pennsylvania. My mother read aloud to my sister and me, and it's really the only time that I remember her ever reading a book at the dinner table after we'd finished eating. She'd asked my sister and me to listen to it, and she read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring aloud to my sister and me. And I was about 13 at the time, and it made a big impression. And in terms of an evolutionary step in my own education, it connected to those early lessons about the farm that I love to take that same duty to a larger sphere. And then, as I mentioned the other day, when I was a college student, I was lucky enough to walk into the classroom of Roger Revelle, who was the first scientist who was hired experiment. And when I first saw the Keeling curve, the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere were increasingly steady, steadily increasing year on year. And of course, when the northern hemisphere, with the bulk of the land mass, where the trees dropped their vegetation in the fall, the CO2 levels would increase without outgassing. And then in the spring for the northern hemisphere, when the leaves breathed in again, the CO2 went down. But the peak each year kept on rising. And Professor Revelle understood the implications with startling clarity. He was an amazing man. And he opened my eyes to what he saw coming in the future. And there is almost nothing that has unfolded in the last half century that does not fit precisely within the predictions that he made. And I say I was lucky and that it was a privilege, and it truly was, because I trusted him, I learned from him, and because of his brilliance and his passion, there was never a time when I encountered the new evidence that it was always coming in that I wasn't able to just fit it right into the pattern that he had predicted so long ago. And while there was debate back and forth about whether this new evidence or that new evidence was truly significant, for me it was easy because he had pointed the way. But even with that evolutionary learning process, which was enough for me to organize the first congressional hearing, to work with the late John Hines and others to push forward in the Congress of the United States. The key step much later for me, and it was actually after my first campaign for president. I started in 1987 when I was 38 years old. If you look up chutzpah in the dictionary, you'll see a picture of my announcement in the campaign. But I learned a lot in that campaign. But on April 3rd, wondering how I could become more effective as a communicator and as someone who wanted to bring about better policies in our country, personal experience when I saw one of my children hit by an auto, almost died, and it was a searing emotional experience. And it was something that taught me more than I think any other experience has in my life. And I won't go into all of the details except to tell you that during the 30 days that I spent in the intensive care unit, not knowing whether I would live or die, and the months after when it was very uncertain what the aftermath would be. By the way, this story has a very happy ending. My child is now grown, expecting a child himself, and has made a fantastic recovery. But during those dark days, my life changed dramatically, and I questioned all of the priorities in my life. Professionally, I remember sitting in the hospital and looking at the densely events that stretched out in the months after that accident. And the weight of those events, as I had experienced them, putting them on, really very important to talk to this group, very important to travel to this organization or city or whatever. And I was already feeling the weight of these important occasions. And that was in contrast to how they just blew off the calendar with a weight less than feathers. They just all disappeared because my life had had a new focus. And just as my personal life and calendar and priorities for my life changed, so did my set of professional priorities. All of the issues I was involved in dealing with in the United States Senate also began to recede into the background, but the one that remained was the climate crisis. Perhaps because it had a connection to the duties that I was then feeling so acutely as a father, and it caused me to realize that the fate and future of all of my children were going to be profoundly affected by whether or not we dealt with this crisis. And then when I was able to leave the hospital, and then when I was able to pick up some of my professional duties and go back to work, I resumed working on the climate crisis and made it my number one priority. It had already been occupying me my time tremendously. But it was in that hospital where I started jotting down thoughts and started writing the first book that I wrote, Earth in the Balance. To describe how that experience had affected the subject of the climate crisis, and began to think deeply about it, writing that book and meeting with scientists and all the rest. I realized that something had changed, and later I connected it in this way. If you come face to face with the possibility of losing something that is most precious to you, it's an experience that leaves a mark. We all protect ourselves emotionally and spiritually by never thinking about the most horrible things that could happen. We just block those out. But when you're forced to confront it, in my case, it left a raw place in my heart that I felt again when I revisited the climate crisis. And here is how I've tried to put it into words. I experienced this beautiful green and blue earth, this God-given creation, and in all of its majesty and beauty, and felt what it means to us. And I felt for the very first time something I never could have felt before, and that is, we could lose this. We could lose this. That's not a thought that you will hear in the climate movement very often. It's certainly not something that I had felt so deeply and emotionally prior to that. But when I did feel it, the change it had already brought about in me was a level of passion and deep, deep commitment that I wasn't capable of before. I had come to it intellectually. My teacher and my earlier teachers, but particularly Professor Revelle, had equipped me with the knowledge that I was able to add to as I grew and got older. And I understood it intellectually. And that gave me a sense of urgency that I could express in words. But what changed was I felt it really deep down in the core of my being. And ever since that time, I have had a source of energy and drive and commitment that does not make me weary. This cause feels exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, and I have felt that it is a privilege and a source of joy to go into action to try to make sure that we do not lose what is most precious to all of humanity and all of the generations of human beings yet to come. It is difficult to absorb the reality that those of us who are alive today in this day and time have been presented with a challenge that we didn't ask for. Nobody intended to create this, but it is now. The knowledge and the feelings that you have been exposed to here and that you have felt yourself. And when you go from this place to try to build this movement and to generate that sense of urgency and resolve in those with whom you communicate, remember always what it is that caused you to come here. That passion, that feeling of commitment is the most important thing you can possibly communicate emotionally and spiritually to the people with whom you interact as you engage in trying to move this issue forward. I'm so grateful to you for taking this time. We are all in this movement together. We're going to win. We're going to win this, but we must win it in time. So in closing, I'll finish where I started. Thank you. God bless you. And as I often say, always remember that political will is a renewable resource. Thank you for being here. God bless.